He poured wine at his black wife in a moment of utter disrespect. But her next move, it turned the entire room on its head. What happens next will leave you stunned. Keep watching. The soft hum of a grand piano filled the air as Betty and her husband, David, sat at their table in the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The candlelight cast a warm glow on Betty's radiant skin as she smiled across the table at David, her eyes sparkling with pride. She had planned this evening as a surprise to celebrate his recent promotion, a moment to reflect on their journey and the dreams they had worked so hard to achieve. David looked sharp in his tailored suit, the picture of success, though his mind was preoccupied. The conversation was pleasant at first, talk of future plans and shared memories, but David's eyes occasionally flicked to his phone. Betty, ever composed, gently placed her hand over his. "David, tonight is about us. Just us. Before we dive in, I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Whether you're relaxing at home or sneaking a break at work, drop your location in the comments below. You won't believe how this story unfolds. It's packed with twists, drama, and an ending that will leave you speechless. So grab your seat and stay tuned, because what starts as a simple dinner date is about to become a night no one will ever forget. Let's get into it. Their waiter arrived with their entrees, David's favorite steak, and Betty's signature choice of a delicate seafood platter. As they began to eat, the tension of the day seemed to melt away. Betty spoke animatedly about her ideas for their future, while David nodded along, though his gaze seemed distracted. As the evening wound down, David leaned back in his chair and signaled for the check. Betty's lips curled into a subtle smile, but she said nothing. When the waiter arrived, David reached for the check, but instead of handing it to him, the waiter hesitated. "Excuse me, sir," the waiter began cautiously. "The bill hasn't been settled yet." David's brow furrowed, his smile dropping. "That's impossible. My wife said she arranged everything." The waiter glanced nervously at Betty, who simply sipped her wine, unbothered. David's voice grew sharper. "Betty, don't tell me you forgot your wallet. How could you come to a place like this unprepared?" Betty placed her glass down, maintaining her calm attitude. "David, it's fine. Everything is under control." "Under control," David repeated, his tone rising. A few diners at nearby tables glanced in their direction. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. Who forgets to pay the bill at a place like this?" Betty's face remained serene, though a faint shadow of hurt flickered in her eyes. "David," she said softly, "let's not make a scene." But David was past reasoning. He grabbed his wine glass and, in a moment of frustration, poured its contents over her pristine dress and face. Gasps echoed across the room as the deep red liquid seeped into the fabric, staining the cream-colored gown she had chosen so carefully for the occasion. Betty froze, her lips parting slightly, but she refused to let her composure crack. For a moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. David sat back, seemingly satisfied that his point had been made. Taking a steady breath, Betty stood, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. Her voice was steady, though her words carried a weight that made David shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Excuse me for a moment." Without another word, she walked toward a door marked "Private," her head held high. The room watched her in stunned silence, the murmurs growing louder as she disappeared from sight. David remained at the table, a flicker of unease crossing his face as he looked around at the disapproving stares from other diners. He fumbled with his napkin, muttering under his breath. Little did he know that the night was far from over, and that Betty's quiet exit was only the beginning of a twist he would never see coming. She walked through the narrow hallway, her mind racing yet calm. This night was supposed to be perfect, a surprise celebration not only for David but for everyone who had helped her rise to this moment. Instead, it had turned into a public humiliation at the hands of the man she trusted most. But Betty had always been someone who turned pain into power, and she wasn't about to let this setback ruin everything she had built. At the end of the hall was a staircase draped with velvet ropes. She untied the rope with ease and ascended the stairs, each step bringing her closer to her purpose. The upstairs was a private suite, reserved for the owner, a luxury known only to a select few. Betty had designed every detail herself, from the vintage gold-framed mirrors to the plush white armchair that overlooked the city skyline. Inside the private closet, she unzipped her ruined dress and let it fall to the floor in a crimson-streaked heap. She moved with precision, selecting a tailored white suit with clean, sharp lines, a statement of resilience and control. The silk of the suit felt like armor against the chaos of the evening. She smoothed her hair back and reapplied a touch of lipstick in front of the mirror. As she stared at her reflection, she whispered to herself, "You are more than their doubts. Show them who you are." Downstairs, David sat stiffly at the table, shifting uneasily under the weight of the stares and whispers. The other patrons had seen everything: the wine, the humiliation, Betty's calm departure, and their silent judgment was suffocating. He drummed his fingers on the table, muttering under his breath, "Where is she?" Moments later, a tall man in a sharp suit approached David. He introduced himself with a polite nod and gestured for David to follow. Confused but desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere, David followed the man through another door leading to the main hall. When the doors opened, David was blinded for a second by the bright chandelier lights. As his vision adjusted, he took in the grand sight before him. Rows of elegantly set tables filled with powerful figures, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and leaders from various industries. The hum of anticipation filled the room as the crowd turned toward the stage. The murmuring hushed as the spotlight clicked on. Betty stood center stage, radiant in her white suit, her expression composed yet commanding. She held the microphone with grace as the crowd erupted into applause. David's heart thudded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Betty, the sane woman he had just humiliated, stood before a crowd of influential people, glowing with authority. He felt small, insignificant, in the face of her unwavering strength. Betty's gaze swept the room, and when her eyes locked on David, they carried a message as clear as day. "You underestimated me." David's palms grew damp as he realized that Betty hadn't just walked away from their table. She had stepped into her rightful place as a leader, a visionary, and the architect of an empire. The spotlight remained fixed on the center stage, illuminating Betty as she stood tall and composed in her white suit. Her every move commanded attention, and the room felt charged with anticipation. David lingered near the entrance, frozen in disbelief. His mind raced to make sense of what he was seeing. The same woman he had dismissed only minutes ago now stood before a room packed with some of the most influential figures in the city. CEOs, philanthropists, and celebrities all watched her with admiration and respect. David's heart sank as he realized this wasn't just an event. It was her event. Betty's voice, steady and resonant, carried across the room as she began to speak. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. This gathering isn't just a celebration. It's a reflection of everything we've built together." The audience erupted in applause, and Betty smiled warmly, waiting for the room to settle before continuing. She began to share her story. How she had started with nothing but a dream and an unshakable belief in herself. She spoke about the challenges she had faced as a black woman in the business world, the rejections, and the moments of doubt. "There were times when the doors I knocked on wouldn't open," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But instead of giving up, I decided to build my own doors and my own rooms." The crowd listened, captivated. Several nodded along, moved by her resilience and courage. In the corner of the room, a prominent tech mogul leaned in and whispered to his wife, "She's incredible." David felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He had always known Betty was ambitious, but he had underestimated just how vast her world was. This wasn't a dinner date gone wrong. This was her legacy unfolding right in front of him. Betty continued, "I didn't do this alone. Along the way, I had mentors, friends, and partners who believed in the vision even when it seemed impossible. She gestured towards several individuals seated at the front row, powerful allies who had invested in her businesses and watched her empire grow. Tonight, we honor not just success, but the community that made it possible. As the room applauded again, Betty's eyes found David in the back of the room. She paused, the room growing still once more. And sometimes, she said, her voice softer but no less powerful, the people closest to us forget who we really are. They forget the battles we've fought and the victories we've won. But that's okay, because every moment of doubt is an opportunity to rise. The crowd erupted in cheers, some even rising to their feet. David's throat felt dry as he watched her command the room with grace and strength. His guilt twisted inside him. He had embarrassed her in front of strangers, yet she was standing taller than ever, reminding the world, and him, exactly who she was. As Betty wrapped up her speech, she gestured for the waitstaff to begin serving champagne to the guests. Tonight, we celebrate resilience, vision, and the beauty of building something bigger than ourselves, she concluded, raising her glass as the room toasted in her honor. David's palms felt clammy as he hesitantly stepped forward. He could see the admiration in the eyes of the people surrounding Betty, and he felt utterly out of place. As he reached the front of the room, she stepped down from the stage, and the sea of well-wishers parted for her. She walked toward David, her face serene but unreadable. "Betty." David's voice cracked as he spoke. "I am so sorry." Betty paused, meeting his gaze. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He saw her strength and dignity, and knew that an apology wasn't enough to undo what had happened. Her voice was calm but resolute. "David, respect isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. Tonight wasn't about you or me. It was about something bigger." David nodded, unable to speak. The hum of conversation began to swell again as the event continued, but to David, it felt like the world had slowed down. Betty turned back toward the crowd, greeted by handshakes, hugs, and congratulations. She was radiant, a beacon of success and resilience. As David stood alone at the edge of the room, he realized that he hadn't just witnessed her triumph. He had witnessed the unveiling of her true power. Betty wasn't just his wife. She was a force to be reckoned with, and the world knew it. Betty moved gracefully among the guests, accepting hugs and congratulations, her white suit as pristine as her unwavering dignity. David watched her from a distance, a hollow ache settling in his chest. The room buzzed with admiration for her, and yet all he could feel was the crushing weight of regret. A tall man in an expensive suit clasped Betty's hand. "Betty, your story is an inspiration," he said, his eyes brimming with admiration. "You've built an empire that people will talk about for generations." "Thank you," Betty replied warmly. She carried herself like a queen among kings, a leader who had earned every ounce of respect she received. David felt like an outsider, an uninvited guest at his wife's coronation. He had always known she was extraordinary, but he had never fully grasped the depth of her strength until now. He remembered the early days of their relationship, the long nights when she worked tirelessly, sketching out plans and chasing deals while he slept beside her. She had fought so hard for her dreams, and tonight, she was standing at the summit of everything she had built. His feet felt heavy as he made his way through the crowd, his heart thudding in his chest. He finally reached her, but she was mid-conversation with a renowned businesswoman who was raving about Betty's latest philanthropic project. "You've changed so many lives," the woman gushed. "I can't wait to see what you do next." Betty's smile didn't waver, but when her eyes flickered toward David, something shifted in her gaze. It wasn't anger, it was something far more unsettling. Calm detachment. She turned back to the woman and graciously excused herself. The crowd parted as Betty stepped toward David, their eyes locked in an unspoken exchange. David swallowed hard. "Betty." His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I don't know where to begin. I was wrong. So wrong." He clenched his fists, searching for the right words. I was supposed to celebrate you tonight, and instead, I ruined everything." Betty remained silent, her face unreadable. David's throat tightened. "I was selfish. I let my insecurities get the better of me. I see now that you're not just incredible, you're unstoppable. And I didn't support you the way I should have. I humiliated you when I should have lifted you up." The silence between them stretched. David braced himself for anger. But when Betty spoke, her voice was steady and measured. "David, I don't need grand speeches or apologies. I needed respect. I needed you to remember who I am, who I've always been." David nodded, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're right," he whispered. "And I can't undo what happened. But I'll spend every day proving that I understand now." Betty's gaze softened, though her resolve remained. "It's not about promises, David. It's about choices." She took a slow breath and continued, "I don't need you to make me whole. I've always been whole. But if you want to stand beside me, it has to be as my equal, not my critic." David's chest felt tight, but he nodded earnestly. "I understand." Betty gave a small, almost wistful smile. "We'll see." She turned toward the stage, where the crowd was gathering for the next toast. With effortless poise, she stepped back into the center of the room, where the night's focus remained on her remarkable achievements. The MC raised his glass. "To Betty, a visionary, a leader, and an inspiration." The room erupted in applause, and the champagne sparkled under the chandelier lights. David stood at the edge of the room, watching as the guests surrounded Betty like she was a beacon of hope and ambition. Though he felt lost in the crowd, he knew this night wasn't about him. It was about her. And in that moment, he understood that her light had never needed his approval. It shone on its own, dazzling and unbreakable. As the night drew to a close, Betty's close friends and partners lined up to speak with her, offering more deals and congratulatory handshakes. Billionaire investors marveled at her vision, eager to be part of her next project. Betty finally caught a quiet moment and stepped out to the balcony overlooking the city. The air was crisp, and the city lights twinkled below like stars. David followed, keeping a respectful distance. She didn't look at him as she spoke. "The view is beautiful, isn't it?" David nodded. "It is." He hesitated. "But not as beautiful as the way you stood your ground tonight." Betty turned slightly, her expression softer now. "David, I didn't stand my ground for applause. I stood my ground because I've worked too hard to shrink for anyone." David stepped forward, but only a little. "I know," he murmured. "I see it now." For a moment, they stood in silence, the night air cool against their skin. Finally, Betty turned to go back inside. "Good night, David," she said, her voice gentle but firm. David watched her walk away, the gravity of his mistakes settling deep within him. But beneath his regret was a quiet hope, a determination to be better, not just for her, but for himself. Betty had shown the world who she truly was, and now it was up to him to decide who he would become. As Betty rejoined the crowd, the applause welcomed her back, like a queen returning to her court. She had claimed her moment, her story, and her future, and the world would never forget the night Betty showed what true power looked like. As the applause faded and the night drew to a close, one truth remained undeniable. Betty's story wasn't just about triumph. It was a reminder that strength often blooms in the face of doubt. Now, it's your turn. What would you have done if you were in Betty's shoes? Do you think David deserves a second chance, or was Betty right to set her boundaries? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.